Hello, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope you're having a fantastic weekend so far. This is Saturday Night Crafting, and this video tonight is part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1, please do go and watch that first, because then this kind of ties in a little bit with that, and it might explain things a bit more, because some of the techniques kind of come off the back of some of the ones in the first one. Not all of them, just a couple, I think. But tonight's video, again, is going to be using embossing folders. I'm primarily focusing on these 2 embossing folders. And these are all the techniques that are going to be shown to you in just a minute. But I wanted to introduce myself and say hello. And if you are new to watching me on YouTube, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel. That helps me to grow, that helps to fund my channel, and it helps me to keep going. Originally, when I started this channel, it was just for fun. I wanted to teach people still, but I wanted to do it from the comfort of my home, and I wanted to do whatever I felt like doing, and then only have my mess to tidy up, essentially. I was doing some in-person classes, but renting a hall got expensive, and it wasn't always reliable when people wouldn't turn up, and it was a lot of prep and a lot of work. So I moved to online teaching, and it has been such enormous fun that it is actually now my primary income. And I have decided to quit my part-time job and go full-time with YouTube. So it's been really exciting, but what it means is that if the more people I have subscribe and the more people that comment and like my videos, that's what gets my income coming in. So YouTube works, to give you a bit of background, YouTube works based on likes and algorithms and comments and subscribers, and the more of those you get, the more income you get. So it costs you absolutely nothing, but it makes me money, and it means that we can pay the bills, and we can actually now start to look at affording a bigger house, which has been a dream for many years. So I am thankful to those of you who are subscribed and leave me comments and keep me going. It's absolutely amazing. But anyways, that was a side blurb. If you wanted to know some background information as to how YouTube works and how you can earn an income from it, that's kind of a little bit about that. But tonight is all going to be focused on embossing folders, and I've got another 12 ideas for you. So there are 25 ideas in total on how you can use embossing folders. And so let's get started, and I hope you enjoy it and have fun. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to SYME. She was the one that suggested this over on my Facebook group. She asked for a video where we could see more of what we can do with our embossing folders. So we're going to dive right on in, and we're going to start with this first one. Now, a lot of you might remember this from primary school or elementary school, where you did a sort of technique like this in one of your art classes, a kind of wax resist. You might have done leaves underneath your paper, something like that. That's what we're going to kind of do with this one here. So I'm taking an embossing folder, and I've got a very, very thin bit of card. So it's not my thickest card. It's not for card bases. It's what I would use as a topper. And I'm just going to drag a wax crayon over the top to pick up the pattern underneath. Now, I'm not focusing on being perfect or amazing, because I will trim these down to make them into cards at some point. So I just need enough in the middle. I'm heat setting it to make sure that there's no flakes of wax dripping off. I just found like I got a better result if I heat set it a bit and melted that wax into the paper or the cardstock. The first one I'm going to try is I'm going to use some of this explosion powder from Pretty Gets Gritty. And I am just wetting my cardstock first. It's not watercolor card, because my watercolor card is too thick to do this technique. And I just kind of sprinkled some of that powder on the top and rubbed it in with a paintbrush, or washed it over with paintbrush. And you can see the areas where the color is being resisted from where the crayon was. This is not my favorite technique, but it is one that works and does give you a different, unique background. You'll see a few samples. I did try a few different ones. You can take your re-inkers and do the same thing. So I took a re-inker and I put it onto a clear block and added some water. I did add more re-inker in a second because I wanted to have more color than that, but I wanted a lighter color to kind of contrast with the blue. And you can see at the end I've trimmed them down. So here's one I did with a bow embossing folder. I did find that the more detailed the pattern and the closer the pattern was together, the better the result was. This is with some words. It really did not work out well. You couldn't see the words at all. It just kind of looked like blobs. But I do like the end result. You get a slightly different background. You get a slightly different look to your kind of card base. And it's worth having a go. I do like the bows the best, even though I preferred the more detailed embossing folders, if that makes sense. Moving on to number 15, we've got our double embossing. So we're going to take our first one. This is one I did in the first video. So number 1 that was released last Saturday, where I took my ink pad and I dragged it across and inked up my background. So the flowers are debossed and the color bit is the bit that's sticking up. I'm going to go ahead and take a spotty embossing folder from my stash and I'm just going to run it through the machine. So now we've got this beautiful detailed look where it looks quite fun because we've managed to get those flowers, but they're now all flat essentially with the bumpies on top. So we've originally embossed it, but we colored it and then we've kind of hidden that embossing with the details of the bumpies. If you want to have the double, then what you need to do is make sure that you do your smallest, more detailed embossing folder first, and then your bigger, larger one second. So you see the little dots in between the bigger embossing folder. If you don't do it that way, and if you do the flowers first, the more bigger chunky one, and then the detailed one second, you lose the flowers. So you can see here they've completely disappeared, which is what I did with the original one where I inked it up. So that didn't matter so much because we got the effect from where we inked it up. But if you want to maintain having both your details from your embossing folders, do the smallest one first. Next, we're going to do a fake foil card or a faux foiled card. What you're going to want to do is take a embossing folder. Again, you want a more detailed, tight together one. The more spaced out it is, the harder it is. And you'll see again, I've used the bows in this one. You'll see the result from that. So this is a wood grain embossing folder. I'm just using a big chunk of cards so that we can see how it goes. And all we do is we stick down some Versamark, some embossing ink first and rub it onto your embossing folder. It doesn't matter which side, they both kind of give the same effect. Then we're going to go ahead and pour on some embossing powder. If you have metallic embossing powder, this looks really cool. It looks like you've done fake foiling, but you don't have a foiling machine. So then we just go ahead and melt our embossing powder and you get this gorgeous metallic shine shining through your plain matte cardstock. So it's a really gorgeous look. And it looks like you foiled it, but you didn't actually need a foiling machine or any kind of foiling dies. You've just got this really beautiful look. Now you're going to see in a second I've got the bow die, which I kind of like, but because it's not a deep set embossing folder, you don't get the same amount of detail. Your ink kind of gets stuck in between, if that makes sense. So this is what I got when I did one that was more spaced out. Right, we're going to do a chalk effect. So I'm going to use my white pigment ink. This is the Hero Arts Unicorn White ink. And what we're going to do is the same sort of thing. We're going to ink up our embossing folder. Now, because it's a pigment ink, it sticks really nicely to those details on the embossing folder. And I started out by inking up just around the outside. I didn't think I was going to do the middle. This is the special embossing folder that's a cut and emboss. So it does cut the middle image out. But I decided that I would just go for it all in the end and do the middle bit, and you'll see that it just ends up backwards because I wanted to make sure that I had my ink on the raised side because I wanted my images to be inked, not the reverse. So I had to do it on the back, which then meant the writing comes out backwards. Now I went and put it through my embossing machine and you can see I've got some little blotchy areas. If you get that, the pigment ink stays wet for a while. So what you can do is you can go ahead and add a shim of another sheet or two of cardstock underneath, and that will kind of give a bit more squeezing power to your machine. And then you can see I've got a nice clear image. And when you put that ink on the embossing powder, make sure you're just dabbing it very, very lightly and very, very gentle so you don't get it in between the images. Right, now we're moving on to you embossing different items. You can emboss toilet paper, you can emboss paper towel. You could emboss tissue paper, any kind of thin, frail paper. You can use this technique on and you can have some fun using what's around your house. And it gives it a different feel, a different look, a different texture, which is always good fun. You could, in the end, rip these edges as well and get like a nice torn edge. I'm going to start with my homemade sprays. I'll link this video down below where I'll show you how I make my own sprays. I've had these for over a year now. On my shelf, I filled them with just normal water and none of them have gone moldy or funny and they all work just fine. I'm going to start by spraying down my paper towel. This is 3 layers of paper towel or kitchen roll depending on what country you're in, and I've folded them in half and just chopped them in half so I could show you 2 different ones rather than just having one. Getting started on the first one, which is a basic one, I'm going to spray it with water on both sides, get it nice and wet, but we want it damp. We don't want it soaking wet and dripping, because when you put it through the die cut machine and you emboss it, you get the water squidging out. You'll see that on sample number 2, because I went for gold and I kind of went a little overboard. So I've run it through my machine and I pull it out, and you get this really awesome texture on a cool different kind of background. Now at this point you could go ahead and tear the edges if you want and have a nice sort of torn rustic edge look. I went to go and put the green down, but my green got a bit clogged up, so I decided to switch to gold. And then I didn't have as much pigment in them as I wanted, so I did go quite heavy-handed and then wet the back as well, which was probably my error. I could have probably just got away without wetting the back. But I ran it through my machine, and it got a little bit squidgy, and so I had to make sure that I wiped up some of that water when I went through, when it was going through. But you get this gorgeous shimmery look from the shimmer sprays, and you get just a different fun background texture to work with. Now we can go into multicolor. So this one is probably one of my favorites. There are 2 top favorites. This is definitely one of the top 2. What we're doing is just smudging some ink onto our embossing folder, not trying to be careful, because what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and spray that now. And I did use too much water in this one. This one really squidged all over my machine. And you have to be careful, because you've got to put the cardstock down on that side. So you can see here I've got all this juiciness squirting out, but I love this. I love how the colors went together. I love when I opened it, it gave it a kind of blotchy look. And here it is when it's fully dry. I left it out in the sun for a bit. I think it's beautiful. I absolutely love this technique. I love the texture you get from it. It's really lovely. Anyways, sorry, too many loves. I really enjoyed that one. Right, number 20 is impressions. So we are going to use our embossing folder to impress an image into our heat embossed panel. So I went ahead and cut myself a octagon, and I'm just going to apply some gold embossing powder. I taped it, or I glued it down onto a sheet of card, so I had something to hold on to while I did it. The heat gun often ends up releasing some of the sticky, so I wasn't too worried about it being stuck down permanently, and the back of it doesn't really matter. So I did 3 layers of gold embossing powder and heated it all. On this last 3rd layer, I gave it a really good extra heat. Then I pushed my embossing folder down into the front of it. Now I did squish the middle a bit too hard at first, and so I got a little bit of a blobby kind of look. It's worth having to practice. If you don't like it though, you can heat it again and do it again. You don't have to waste it. You just reheat your embossing powder and you can try that image out again. So 21 is vellum. I didn't cover this in the first video, which I probably should have done, but you can emboss vellum and it gives you this gorgeous, stunning look. It is different to paper. I feel you've got that white edge where it embosses into your vellum, and it's just beautiful. We're going to take that vellum now and we're going to do something else with it, which is why I wanted to share it with you. We're going to use gilding wax. So this is just a silver fine wax. I've got several of these in my stash. I never know what to do with them. What you want to do is use the teeniest bit, like you're just going to just get the tiniest bit on your fingertip, and just very gently rub and glide over those raised areas. It's very easy to accidentally go in between them. So if you've got a nice tight embossing folder, which you'll see in a second, it makes it much easier not to have a mess and get any in between the images, but you get this beautiful little gold highlight to your background. Here's a piece of vellum where I've got the tighter embossing folder. I hope I'm making sense when I say tighter embossing folder. It's got more detail, more pattern on it. And I'm doing silver on one side and gold on the other, so you can just see how it looks. And you get this beautiful golden shine, silvery shine, metallic shine. So I've done silver on those flowers in the middle, not all the flowers, but I did about 4 of them. So you can see there, it just highlights it ever so slightly. Now number 23 is envelopes. Don't forget your envelopes. You can emboss those as well to blend them in with your card, to give a funky, nice, detailed envelope. Just kind of pizzazz up your envelopes a bit. And this is all you do. You just tuck it into your embossing folder with the flap and run it through just like you would any other piece of paper or card. Envelopes are nice and thin. They go through really easily. Number 24, metallic distressing. So I'm going to go ahead, I think I spelled metallic wrong by the way as well. I'm just going to emboss a piece of foil card. This is a fun one that I saw years ago at a demonstration, and I always forget about it. If you want to take some stays on, if you've got stays on, because this will stay on the metallic foil card and dry quite quickly. We're going to drag it across the top and get it on top of all those creases. It doesn't matter if it smears a bit, it just kind of adds to the effect. You want to make sure that's dry before you then come in with your Versamark embossing ink, and you're going to drag that across the top. And then I'm just going to sprinkle 3 different colors of metallic embossing powder. I've got gold, I've got silver, and I've got rose gold. And I did knock my embossing powder across my desk, so just make sure you're being careful in between. And I'm just going ahead and sticking down a bunch of embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set it and melt it all. Now I did put a bit too much embossing powder down, and I felt like I kind of lost that black ink in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add the black ink in again. You can do this as many times or as few times as you like, but it gives you a really cool distressed kind of aged metallic background. It just looks so cool. So that's another fun one. And we're coming on now to our very last of my series. We've got number 25, stamping under the embossing. Now all the credit for this one goes to Anne Craig, whose blog I found online. She had done this with a wood grain or a tree embossing folder, and she managed to do this with trees and cars, and it was really cool. So I will leave her blog link down below where I found her. And I was so impressed by this one. I have never seen this one before, and I was so excited about it. What we're doing is we are going to start with the side that your image is on. So you want to start with your raised image side. So usually it's got the colored side or the side with the label. Flip your stamping platform around to rubber stamps. The embossing folder makes it thicker, therefore we need to account for that. You're going to line your stamp up where you want it to go on your embossing folder before we ink it up. So we're going to get that positioned in the stamp platform first. I'm going to take some distress ink and I'm going to rub it along the embossing folder. I'm going to take my VersaFine Clair, because this is a nice sticky juicy ink, and I'm going to use that to stamp my image onto my embossing folder. Now we can take our piece of cardstock, lie it in the embossing folder. I'm going to use 2 shims because I want to make sure that that ink really gets pressed into my cardstock, and I'm going to run it through. And this is just the coolest. Now we have a stamped image that looks like it is stamped underneath our embossing folder. It is such a cool technique. Now I haven't worked out yet how you can do it so you don't get the streaks from your embossing or from your ink pad. So you can see there's a couple patches and it's a bit streaky, but I decided to spritz it with some shimmer spritz and see if that would melt, or not melt, if it would kind of merge my ink a little bit more in the background. It didn't, but I like how shimmery it got and I thought it was really cool. But this has got to be the coolest technique I've ever seen to use with embossing folders, where you're stamping on the embossing folder and making it look like it's coming through behind your embossed images. It is just the coolest ever. So thank you to Anne for posting that on her blog, because it is just so awesome. Now when you're cleaning your embossing folders, if you go and clean it with some water and you struggle to get that image off, grab your hand sanitizer and just plop a little of that on a cloth and it'll come right off. It's got lots of alcohol in there and it'll take it right off for you. You can use stamp cleaner, you can use rubbing alcohol. I just had hand sanitizer to hand because who doesn't? And it will just clean your embossing folder off beautifully and you won't have any residue behind. I just always make sure to come in with a bit of water and just make sure it's nice and clean. You could do this at your kitchen sink as well. So this one is definitely the top winner of this whole entire series. I love this one. This is brand new to me and it is so cool. So I hope you stuck it out for the whole video. I'm sorry it's a longer one, but we had a lot of ideas to get through. And I hope you enjoyed this series. If you'd like me to do any more series, I'm always welcome to suggestions. You can pop them down in the description box and I'll take a look at them. But I'm so grateful for you joining me on this fun little adventure with embossing folders. I hope it's given you lots of inspiration and ideas. And please do like and subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot to me. And I will see you again this week, hopefully for a midweek video, and definitely by next Saturday for some Saturday night crafting. So thank you very much. Enjoy your evening. Bye.